Emily Harrow was once known as the gentle pediatrician, with a perfect life loved by patients, admired by peers, and devoted to her 4-year-old daughter, Lila. But behind the smiles and storybook photos was a woman quietly unraveling. When Lila's lifeless body was found floating in an Airbnb pool, what seemed like a tragic accident quickly turned into a haunting tale of deception, desperation, and a mother's terrifying final choice. Dr. Emily Harrow was the kind of person people instinctively trusted. With her soft voice, steady hands, and warm presence, she had become a fixture in Charleston's pediatric community. Parents described her as compassionate, attentive, and deeply patient, traits not only rare in medicine, but also in life. At 38 years old, Emily had built what seemed like a perfect life. She owned a charming townhouse in a quiet suburb, drove a clean white SUV, and volunteered at weekend health fairs. Her greatest joy, however, was her 4-year-old daughter, Lila. The little girl was often seen clinging to her mother's coat in the clinic, wide-eyed and quiet, her curls bouncing as she toddled along behind her. Emily never missed a chance to post about her daughter online, smiling over pancakes. Running through the park, sleeping curled up beside a stuffed giraffe. To outsiders, they were inseparable. But beneath that curated image was a mounting storm. Emily had been embroiled in a bitter custody battle with Lila's father, Andrew Lane, for almost a year. Andrew, a well-paid financial analyst in Atlanta, had once shared a brief, passionate relationship with Emily that fell apart soon after Lila was born. At first, co-parenting had been manageable. But as Andrew pushed for more visitation rights, he began raising concerns about Emily's behavior. He alleged that she was overworked, increasingly paranoid, and emotionally erratic. He filed court documents detailing missed pediatric appointments, forgotten school applications, and late-night calls in which Emily sounded disconnected from reality. Most of their friends took Emily's side, convinced Andrew was exaggerating to gain control. Emily, after all, was the doctor. She knew what she was doing. Still, cracks began to show. Some of her colleagues quietly noted her fatigue as she was often late for her shifts, distracted during consultations, and prone to angry outbursts when questioned. She'd recently been placed under internal review for a misdiagnosis that, while minor, raised eyebrows. The pressure at work, the fight in court, and the demands of single parenting began to weigh heavily. Emily's once pristine home became cluttered. Her fridge was often empty. She took sleeping pills to rest, then drank coffee all day to stay awake. In court, the judge ruled that Andrew would be granted temporary custody starting the following week, a decision Emily didn't take well. She was seen crying in her car after the hearing, staring blankly at her steering wheel for nearly an hour. 2 days later, she booked an Airbnb just outside of Savannah. It was a picturesque villa with an in-ground pool, spacious interior, and tall privacy hedges all around. She told her receptionist it was a weekend getaway, a chance to recharge, to give Lila a mini vacation before the court order took effect. No one thought twice. It was exactly the kind of thing a good mother would do. On social media, she posted a photo of the backyard pool at sunset with a single caption. "Sometimes you need to disappear for a while," would be her last post. The morning sun had barely begun to warm the sky when a frantic 911 call was placed from a quiet, residential street just outside Savannah. The caller, a woman staying next door, reported hearing screams, raw, piercing cries that jolted her out of bed. Moments later, emergency services arrived at the white-shuttered villa where Dr. Emily Harrow had checked in just 2 days earlier. What they found was a scene that sent chills through even the most seasoned responders. Emily was crouched near the edge of the backyard pool, soaking wet, trembling, and wide-eyed with shock. Floating motionless in the shallow end was the small body of her daughter, Lila. Emily claimed she had woken up to find Lila missing from her bed and discovered her in the pool shortly after. She said she pulled her out, tried CPR, and called for help. Her voice cracked as she told first responders that her daughter must have wandered out in the night. The glass doors leading to the pool were unlocked, and there were no signs of forced entry. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident, a small child, curious and unattended, slipping silently into the water while her mother slept just feet away. The responding officers were careful not to jump to conclusions. Emily was clearly in distress. Her hands shook as she recounted the events, her clothes clinging to her body, soaked from the waist down. Paramedics gently wrapped her in a thermal blanket, while others tended to Lila, but the child was already cold. There was nothing they could do. An officer retrieved Emily's phone, which had slipped into the grass during her panicked call, and began documenting the scene. The mood was somber. Accidental drownings were heartbreaking but not uncommon. However, as the forensic team began its work, subtle irregularities emerged. Lila's body didn't look like it had spent much time in the water. Her skin wasn't wrinkled or discolored in the typical pattern of drowning victims. Her mouth and nose showed no signs of frothing. And despite Emily's claims of attempting CPR, there was no bruising or compression typically associated with chest compressions. The body appeared to still, too placed. Detectives began asking quiet questions. When was the last time anyone saw Lila alive? Had Emily made any calls or texts the night before? Why was there no baby monitor in the room? Emily offered vague answers. She said she and Lila had watched a movie, eaten popcorn, and gone to bed early. She didn't remember hearing any sounds during the night. As she spoke, she clutched a damp towel around her shoulders, rocking slightly. Later that day, the coroner transported Lila's body for autopsy. Meanwhile, police began collecting surveillance footage from nearby properties. One camera, mounted near the property's edge, caught a faint shadow of someone outside at 3:11 a.m., walking toward the pool. The figure matched Emily's build. No child was visible. Investigators began to suspect that this wasn't just a heartbreaking accident. Something wasn't adding up, and the truth would be far darker than anyone expected. The autopsy results came back quicker than expected, and they changed the course of the investigation entirely. Lila Harrow had not drowned. There was no water in her lungs, no evidence of struggle or panic. Instead, her bloodstream contained a high concentration of a sedative commonly used in pediatric medicine, dose far beyond what any child her age should have had. Combined with the absence of water in her airways, the findings led the medical examiner to conclude that Lila had died before ever entering the pool. The drowning had been staged. With this revelation, authorities pivoted from a tragic accident to a potential homicide. Investigators returned to the Airbnb with a new perspective. They examined the medicine cabinet, trash bins, and kitchen drawers. In a small travel bag beside Emily's bed, they discovered an open blister pack of prescription sleep aids and a bottle of children's cold medicine. The combination, they believed, could have been used to sedate Lila. Fingerprints confirmed Emily had handled both items in the hours leading up to Lila's death. Detectives then combed through Emily's digital footprint. Her internet history revealed disturbing searches made in the days before the trip. How much is too much children's Benadryl? How long does it take for a body to float and drowning without struggle? Most damning was a deleted text recovered from her cloud account, sent to a close friend late Friday night. "I'm not okay. I'm so tired of fighting. I don't want him to take her from me." The text was never answered. A review of security footage from a nearby gas station added to the growing case. At 9:54 p.m. on Saturday night, Emily had been recorded purchasing a bottle of over-the-counter sleep medication and a small bottle of vodka. Her face appeared strained, her eyes distant, as she paid and left without speaking a word to the cashier. Later, the Airbnb's smart doorbell system logged motion at 3:11 a.m. A figure, alone, walked quietly through the yard toward the pool. There was no sound, no lights turned on, and no sign of Lila. Emily's version of events started to fall apart. When questioned again, she insisted she had simply taken Lila for a relaxing weekend, and the girl had slipped out while she was asleep. But her story lacked detail and shifted under pressure. She couldn't explain the presence of sedatives in Lila's system. She offered no explanation for the late-night walk to the pool. When told about the forensic timeline, she went silent. The court ordered a search of Emily's personal devices and cloud storage. Photos, notes, and recordings painted a picture of a woman spiraling. Journals on her phone revealed feelings of hopelessness, resentment, and fear over losing custody. "If I can't be her mother, then who am I?" one entry read. Another simply said, "No one else can have her." Detectives no longer doubted what had happened. The evidence pointed not to an accident, but to a carefully staged death act carried out by a woman who felt cornered. desperate, and ultimately capable of the unthinkable. The unraveling of Dr. Emily Harrow's carefully curated life sent shockwaves through the community. Once admired for her poise and professionalism, she was now at the center of a chilling investigation. As detectives traced her descent into darkness, a deeply fractured woman emerged, one who had spent years concealing personal chaos behind polished appearances. Emily's financial records painted part of the picture. Despite earning a substantial income from her pediatric practice, she was drowning in debt. Credit card statements showed months of missed payments, urgent notices from collections agencies, and thousands spent on legal fees for the custody case. She had recently defaulted on her mortgage and was behind on her clinic's rent. Her house, the one she had once proudly posted about online, was in pre-foreclosure. More alarming were the findings from her medical career. While publicly celebrated, Emily had quietly become the subject of several internal investigations at her clinic. She had misdiagnosed 2 children within 6 months and prescribed medications in incorrect dosages, mistakes that had raised serious red flags. Colleagues described her as increasingly forgetful, moody, and withdrawn. Some had even reported her nodding off at her desk or becoming confused during patient consultations. It was clear she was not well, but nothing revealed her mental state more than the custody proceedings. Andrew Lane, Lila's father, had grown increasingly concerned in recent months. He had documented instances of neglect, including missed school events, skipped meals, and long periods of silence when trying to contact his daughter. Andrew's attorneys argued that Emily was no longer capable of providing stable care. The judge agreed. A court order had been issued, transferring temporary custody to Andrew, with enforcement set to begin the Monday following their Airbnb weekend. Emily had received that decision on a Thursday. 2 days later, Lila was dead. To the prosecution, this timing was critical. It wasn't just about a desperate mother, it was about motive. Emily had known she was about to lose the one thing she believed gave her identity and purpose. In her mind, losing Lila meant complete erasure, social, maternal, emotional. Her journal entries supported this. One read, "If she goes, what's left of me?" Another, dated the night before the trip, chillingly asked, "Can a mother really let go if the world is taking her child away?" As this evidence surfaced, the narrative shifted. Emily wasn't seen as a woman pushed to the edge, but as someone who meticulously planned her daughter's death to appear like a tragic accident. She booked a rental with a pool. She purchased the medications in advance. She waited until the early hours of the morning. And when it was over, she staged the scene, perhaps believing that no one would question a grieving mother. But in trying to cover up the crime, she left too many threads exposed. The autopsy, the digital trail, the financial strain, and her emotional collapse all pointed to the same horrifying conclusion. Lila had not died by accident. She had been silenced by the person she trusted most. The trial of Dr. Emily Harrow captivated the nation, not only because of the crime itself, but because of who she had been before it. The image of a respected pediatrician accused of murdering her own child shattered public perception and drew a relentless media spotlight. Cameras swarmed the courthouse each day, capturing Emily's entrance, no longer in her crisp white coat or tailored dresses, but in a county-issued jumpsuit, her face pale and unreadable. The woman once trusted with the lives of other people, as children, was now on trial for ending her own daughter. The prosecution presented a methodical and devastating case. They laid out a timeline built on surveillance footage, text messages, internet history, and toxicology reports. The sedatives in Lila's bloodstream, the absence of water in her lungs, the early morning footage of Emily walking alone to the pool were carefully explained to the jury. They argued that Emily's actions were deliberate and rooted in a need for control, faced with the impending loss of custody, financial ruin, and a collapsing career. She had chosen the unthinkable rather than let her daughter live without her. Witnesses were called to illustrate her unraveling. Former colleagues described her sudden absences, forgetfulness, and emotional outbursts. One nurse testified that Emily once broke down crying in the middle of a routine vaccination, saying she couldn't do this anymore. Andrew Lane took the stand with visible anguish, recounting how he had begged the court to intervene after witnessing what he called clear signs that Lila wasn't safe. The courtroom remained silent as he described the moment he learned his daughter was gone, only 3 days before he was supposed to bring her home. Emily's defense team argued diminished capacity. They brought in psychologists who testified that she had shown signs of severe emotional distress and untreated depression. They suggested she hadn't planned to kill Lila, but had overdosed her accidentally, in an attempt to calm her during an emotional crisis. They pointed to journal entries expressing guilt, fear, and confusion, suggesting a woman on the brink, not a calculated killer. But the prosecution countered with the cold logic of her actions. The staged scene, the research, the deliberate choices made after Lila was already dead. The jury deliberated for just under 6 hours. When the verdict was read guilty of first-degree murder, Emily didn't react. She sat perfectly still, eyes fixed ahead, hands folded in her lap. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the crime a betrayal of the highest kind, noting that Emily's profession had once been to save children's lives, not end them. After the trial, Lila's memory became a rallying cry for child safety and mental health awareness. A foundation was established in her name, focused on supporting single parents in crisis. Emily's former clinic was renamed, and her medical license was formally revoked. The bright future she once embodied had been erased by her own hand. And the terrible decision she made one quiet night in Savannah. Subscribe for more deep dive investigations into the darkest corners of unsolved crime.